I'm going to be looking at chapter 16 of The Picture of Dorian Gray. And what I've done is I've taken some screenshots of the 2010 film entitled Dorian Gray, just to provide you with some visuals as we go through the pages and the chapter in general. And I've also added on some of the slides some quotations directly from the novel that I really want to just highlight and stand out for you, and also provide you with something to read as we go along. And I will also say that, as I've said before, I know you guys don't like to watch long videos, so I'll try and be as brief as I can where I can. But I think it's also important that I do go in depth to an extent, as far as possible as well, because you don't really want to go looking around here and there and everywhere trying to find more information about the same chapter. It's nice to have an analysis all in one spot. So I ask that you do just bear with me and just take the time to listen and watch this video, and so that we can move on from this chapter and really prepare ourselves and come in strong into chapter 17. Alright, so here we go. You'll remember that the previous chapter, chapter 15, Dorian Gray was at Lady Narborough's little dinner party, and he was very anxious, and he actually succumbed to quite a lot of paranoia. He eventually leaves, and he goes to his home, and he gets incredible hunger. His breath quickened, a mad craving came over him, and he goes and he finds a small Chinese box of black and gold dust lacquer, and he opens it, and inside is this green paste, and of course it's opium. And he closes it up, puts it back inside his cabinet, and then at midnight he kind of creeps out of his house and catches a hansom. And we know at the end of that chapter that he's on his way to an opium den. And chapter 16 really carries on exactly as if there's no break in the chapter from the previous one, in that he's now in the hansom and he's traveling along, and it says to us that the journey seems like it takes forever. And just the setting of chapter 16 and the description from the weather to the road to the opium den itself, it's all very sordid and ugly, and it's just characteristic of who he is as a person, and the things that he's done and the sins that he is going to commit as well. It really is almost like a reflection of his soul, because you must remember now that this chapter 16 is really the downfall. Well, at least we can see there's a definite downfall in his character. And it started already in the previous chapter, but it's really going to get momentum in this chapter. Right, so I'm on page 213, and it talks about how there were opium dens where one could buy oblivion, dens of horror where the memory of old sins could be destroyed by the madness of sins that were new. So in other words, there are these opium dens, and you can go there and you can buy oblivion. Now, oblivion refers to a kind of unconscious, unaware of what's happening around you kind of thing. So in other words, you go to the opium den and you buy the sensation, or you buy the feeling of forgetting, the feeling of not knowing where you are, kind of being just really, really high. Okay, so that's what it means by you can buy oblivion. And then it talks about dens of horror where the memory of old sins could be destroyed. In other words, you've committed a lot of sins, you're feeling guilty, you go there, you have the opium, you forget. And then it says, could be destroyed by the madness of sins that were new. So essentially, obviously doing drugs is a sin in itself. So you're actually doing a sin to get rid of other sins. Right, and then moving on to page 214, it talks about how when Lord Henry and Dorian first met, Lord Henry said to him to cure the soul by means of the senses, and the senses by means of the soul. How the words rang in his ears. So if we look at the first part, of that kind of little epigram, that is really what we need to focus on. The second part here is more like typical of Lord Henry, kind of swapping the two around just to make a nice, clever little witty saying. But the first part, to cure the soul by means of the senses, Lord Henry tells Dorian, listen, if you want to cure your soul, in other words, you're feeling bad, you're feeling guilty, or whatever the case is, you've committed a crime, you need to address the senses. So that's what he's thinking. If I go to this opium den and I forget, I'm addressing my senses with the opium, and so therefore I will cure my soul. He hates the fact that his soul is ugly. He wants to try and cure it. Even though we discussed how he's not necessarily wishing that he had never made this pact with the devil, as it seems, although it's not really what he did. He's not sure whether he likes it or not, but the fact of the matter is that he is trying to forget what he's done. He cannot hide the fact that he feels guilty. Right. And talks about how his soul certainly was sick to death. Yes, his soul is sick to death, and the physical soul, represented by the painting, looks damn ugly as well. That's also sick to death. Was it true that the senses could cure it? He doesn't know, but he's certainly going to find out. Then it goes on about saying innocent blood had been spilled. Yes, Sybil Vane, Basil. What could atone for that? For that there was no atonement. Atonement means forgiveness for your sins. He's saying no, there's no forgiveness. Okay, but although forgiveness was impossible, forgetfulness was possible. So Dorian is going there to try and forget. He knows that he can't be forgiven. It's like too late. Remember when Basil was up in the room with the painting and discovered it for the first time and begged Dorian to atone his sins, ask for forgiveness, and Dorian said, no, it is too late. Well, he's still thinking like that. Okay, he's thinking, no, it is too late, but he's going to try and forget. Then he tries to validate to himself why he killed Basil. Obviously, he feels guilty about it in a sense, rightfully so, surely, but not that guilty. But he's trying to kind of make up a reason or comfort himself as to why he was right in doing what he did, why he was right in killing Basil. And he said, Basil had said things that were dreadful and horrible and not to be endured. Okay, so that's just him trying to validate, okay, I did kill Basil and I did the right thing. Okay, you and I both know obviously that he didn't. Right, then it talks about the hideous hunger for opium began to gnaw at him. Now, yes, as an addiction, that hunger for opium is, working on him. He wants it, he needs it. It's gnawing at him. He has to kind of, please that addiction. So in that part, yes. But also, what else is gnawing at him is all his sins that he's done, and that the fact that he feels so anxious and paranoid all the time. That is also gnawing at him. And so, because that's gnawing at him, therefore the need to forget that is gnawing at him, and therefore the need for opium, which helps him forget, is gnawing at him. I hope that makes sense. All right. Then we're still in the hansom. We're still on our way there, and it talks about the scenario or what the area looks like, and we get the impression of just how ugly it is, and it's a true reflection of how ugly Dorian is and his soul is, and the things and the sins that he's done and he's going to do as well. So at the bottom of page 214, it's quite fitting in that it talks about a dog barked, a seagull screamed, then the poor horse stumbles in a rut and the whole thing swerves sideways. Then it talks about on this clay road, rough paven streets. Talks about the windows in the houses were dark, that there were fantastic shadows silhouetted against some lamps. He watched them. They moved like monstrous marionettes, like puppets. He hated them. A dull rage was in his heart. And the reason why he hated them and a dull rage was in his heart and things like that, we can only assume is he's going into this really run down, poor area, and he kind of hates the fact that he is having to go down there and to go and do this opium to try and help him forget. So he's obviously got some bitterness there. Then there's a young woman who yells something at the hansom, and then two men run after the hansom for about 100 yards, and the driver beats them with a whip. So it's a really sordid, ugly scene that we've got going here. Then it talks about ugliness had once been hateful to him because it made things real, became dear to him now for that very reason. Ugliness was the one reality, the coarse brawl, the loathsome den, the crude violence, the very vileness of thief and outcast were more vivid in their intense actuality of impression than all the gracious shapes of art. They were what he needed for forgetfulness. Now remember, in previous chapters, in the early times when Lord Henry first met Dorian, he said to him that anything that is unpleasant or makes you sad, that doesn't deal with pleasure, hedonism, must be forgotten or not thought of. So now you think, okay, here is Dorian, and he's saying anything that is ugly, like Sybil Vane and all that, We must just discard it, get rid of it, forget about it. Now suddenly, it's the ugliness in the world that is actually what he likes, because it's now real. Everything else is make-believe. Everything else is lie. He lies to people. He covers up. Even his age and his looks don't match up anymore. Nothing's real. So everything that's ugly, like crime and brutality and things like that, those things are very real. And so he actually likes those things, because it is, as it says here, ugliness was the one reality. And like the drugs, for example, which is also very real, is what was needed for forgetfulness. All right. Then it continues going on about the jagged chimney stacks and the black masts of the ships, because now this opium den is at the quay, all right, like a harbor, and it actually talks about how he reached a small shabby house that was wedged in between two gaunt factories. Now factories are also generally dirty things, so it's not a nice place at all. And also talks about the slimy pavement. So he gets out of the hansom, right, and he goes to this house, and the door opened quietly, and he went in without saying a word, to squat misshapen figure that flattened itself into the shadow as he passed. And then at the end of the hall of this building hung a tattered green curtain that swayed and shook in the gusty wind. He dragged it aside and entered a long, low room. The floor was covered with ochre-coloured sawdust, like an orangey browny colour, stained with dark rings of spilt liquor. So you can imagine people being drunk and being high and poor, and they've got nothing. They've just come there to forget their, drink to their sorrows, forget their sins, and that kind of thing. And while he's there, in one of the corners, there's a man with his head buried in his arms. A sailor sprawled over a table. Now, as a reader, that should be flashing lights to you, because you'll remember that Sybil Vane's brother was a sailor. So, although we're not explicitly told at this point, we know that that's James Vane, and that is very important. Alright, so he enters this opium den, and it talks about there, at the end of the room, there was a little staircase leading to a darkened chamber. As Dorian hurried up its 3 rickety steps, the heavy odour of opium met him. He heaved a deep breath, and his nostrils quivered with pleasure. When he entered, a young man with smooth yellow hair looked up at him and nodded in a hesitating manner. "You hear, Adrian," muttered Dorian, and who he finds there is Adrian Singleton. Now you remember Adrian Singleton, in a few chapters ago, was actually the guy who gave Dorian a book, an anthology of poems that he was looking through when he was trying to forget about killing Basil the morning after. But that's not really important, and we don't hear much about Adrian Singleton, pretty much only in this chapter, but it's important to know that Dorian and him were obviously, they knew each other. We don't know exactly how or for how long or anything like that, but basically Dorian has led to Adrian Singleton's life to become the case that it is, and this is why Adrian is in this opium den. So we don't know what Dorian did, but he obviously did something. Then Adrian says to Dorian, "Where else should I be? None of the chaps will speak to me now." So we don't know what he's done, but clearly his reputation is ruined. Right. Dorian winced and looked around at the grotesque things that lay in such fantastic postures. Remember I spoke about earlier how it was the ugliness that had once been hateful to him, made things real, became dear to him now for that very reason. Now we're talking about grotesque things that lay in such fantastic postures. So the words that Wilde uses is quite important, the diction. The twisted limbs, the gaping mouths, the staring lustless eyes fascinated him. What else fascinates Dorian? The Yellow Book. And he says to Lord Henry, "I didn't say I like it, I said it fascinated me." So he's saying now that he doesn't like the fact that he sees all these ugly things and the fact that he has to go to this opium den, but it fascinates him. And that's important. He knew in what strange heavens they were suffering and what dull hells were teaching them the secret of some new joy. They were better off than he was. He was prisoned in thought. Memory, like a horrible melody, or like a disease, was eating his soul away. Alright, so Dorian is in this den and he's looking around, and of course he sees all these terrible looking people, and you can just imagine the scene, and he's saying, wow, these guys are better than me because they are free in terms of thought. According to him, he's saying that I can't escape my thoughts. I cannot get rid of the guilt and the shame that I have. The memory of killing Basil and of all the horrible things that he's done prior to that is like a disease, a malady. It's eating my soul away. Alright. He wanted to escape from himself. So even though Dorian might pretend that he's fine and he's got this portrait that's taking in all his sins and representing his soul and all that, he feels terrible. And as you can see, the downward spiral that he's going, he's come to a point now where even though he looks good and everything, he doesn't have all that he wants. Life is not that great because he can't run away from his horrible, corrupted soul. And then Dorian says no, he's going to go somewhere else. He doesn't want to stick around here. And Adrian says, where, you going to the wharf? And he says, yes. Anyway, eventually he doesn't go, and Adrian kind of convinces him otherwise and says, come and have something to drink, I must have something. And Dorian says, but I don't want to. But anyway, they go towards the bar and they get ready for a drink. Now, you'll see the pictures from the movie don't really match the novel because the movie doesn't exactly follow the novel. But just to provide you with, this is in the opium den, so you can get an idea of what's happening here. Alright, then he's kind of sitting there, Dorian, and there's a bottle of brandy and 2 glasses in front of them and things like that. And then these 2 women come up to him and they want to talk to him. Dorian turns his back at them, he's not interested. And then they carry on trying to talk to him, obviously probably because he's good looking. And then he says, for God's sake, don't talk to me. What do you want? Money, here it is, don't ever talk to me again. Alright. And, well, the reason for that, I would say that it's probably because he just is in a mood. The fact that he's, here he is, sitting in this horrible place. He shouldn't be here. He's not of this class. He doesn't belong here, but he has to be here because this is what he's done with his life. So he's very agitated, he's very irritable. Maybe also he's sick and tired of people coming up to him and pandering up to him, and he just wants to be left alone because he hates himself so much. Anyway, moving on from that, he eventually, it says here, as he drew the curtain aside, a hideous laugh broke from the painted lips of the woman who had taken his money. There goes the devil's bargain. Okay, so he sits there at the bar for a little while, and the interesting thing about Adrian Singleton, who's at the bar with him, versus, let's say, Alan Campbell, both of whom's lives he's ruined, essentially. Alan Campbell wants nothing to do with Dorian, very stern with him. Whereas Adrian Singleton is kind of like he doesn't care anymore. He's still happy to talk to Dorian, even though Dorian's not very interested in talking to him. But anyway, Dorian says, well, you'll write to me if you want anything, and then he decides to leave. So he opens the curtain, and then one of the women who's not on the floor like in this picture, but who's actually just near the bar there, says, there goes the devil's bargain. And Dorian gets upset with that, and he says, curse you, don't call me that. And then she snaps her fingers and says, Prince Charming is what you like to be called, ain't it? And then from that, as soon as she says that, this sailor, who we saw was all drowsy on the table there, suddenly leaps to his feet and looks wildly around. But by that stage, Dorian had already left the door. He had already gone out. So he doesn't see anybody. So Dorian Gray kind of leaves and was walking along, and he starts thinking about Adrian Singleton. It kind of moved him quite a bit in that he wonders if is he really responsible for destroying his life, Adrian's life. And then it goes on to say, well, each man lived his own life and paid his own price for living it. The only pity was one had to pay so often for a single fault. One had to pay over and over again. Indeed, in her dealings with man, destiny never closed her accounts. And that's on page 219. And again, Dorian is trying to validate that he didn't ruin Adrian's life, that everybody has their own life, and everybody's life turns out the way that they are responsible for, So however your life turns out, you're the one who did that. So he kind of feels like it's not really his fault if Adrian turned out that way. Now on page 219, the second half of that page, I suggest you go and read that again. I'm not going to read it all to you now. But anyway, just read it again, and then carrying on with the narrative, Dorian Gray kind of walks on, and then while he's doing this, James Vane, who left the bar, has been following him. He obviously saw this guy walking down the street, and has been following Dorian. And suddenly, Dorian says he felt himself suddenly seized from behind, and before he had time to defend himself, he was thrust back against the wall with a brutal hand round his throat. In a second, he heard the click of a revolver. So James Vane is now caught Dorian and is now going to confront him. And he says to Dorian, "You wrecked the life of Sybil Vane, and Sybil Vane was my sister. She killed herself, I know it. Her death is at your door. I swear I would kill you in return. For years I have sought you. I had no clue, no trace. I knew nothing of you, but the pet name she used to call you. Remember, she always used to refer to you as Prince Charming. Dorian was Prince Charming. That's all the family knew about Dorian." And, James says, "I heard it tonight by chance. Make your peace with God, for tonight you are going to die." And, of course, Dorian is frightened, and he says, "I never knew her and never heard of her. You are mad," and whatever. And James Vane says, "You better confess your sins now, get down on your knees," and all that. And eventually Dorian kind of gets this idea in his head, and he says, "How long ago is it since your sister died? Tell me." And James says, "Well, 18 years. Why are you asking me? What does it matter?" And Dorian says, 18 years. Set me under the lamp and look at my face." Now, of course, Dorian looks like he was when the painting was first created, so he looks like about 20 years old. So he says, "Look, it's clearly a little more of 20 summers. I'm around 20, surely." Yes, the unstained purity of youth was there, page 221. It was obvious that this was not the man who destroyed her life. Is it obvious? Well, shame, appearance versus reality. Yes, appearances physically, it does look like he's about 20. Considering it was 18 years ago, he would have been 2 years old. Doesn't make sense. Then, very important, there's a lot of irony here. Page 221. James Vane realizes that, oh damn, this is not the right guy. This is not who I've been looking for. And he's like, "Geez, I almost murdered you." And then James Vane feels terrible for what he almost did. And Dorian says, "You have been on the brink of committing a terrible crime, my man. Let this be a warning to you not to take vengeance into your own hands." The irony of that, of course, is that Dorian certainly has taken vengeance into his own hands. And now he's trying to give that advice to James Vane. The other thing is that James Vane, once he finds out that this is in fact Dorian, does take vengeance into his own hands. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing there. Anyway, so James Vane feels terrible for what he's done, and Dorian Gray leaves. And after Dorian Gray's left, the lady in the bar, whom Dorian gave money for her to go away, comes outside and says to James, "Listen, I saw you rush out here. I knew what you were going to do. You were following Dorian." Well, she doesn't say Dorian, but she says you were going to follow somebody. You were in pursuit of somebody. "And why did you not kill him?" And James says, "That's not the man that I'm looking for. He only looks like about 20 years old. He's little more than a boy. The guy that I'm looking for must be about 40 now." And she says, "Why, man, it's nigh on 18 years since Prince Charming made me what I am." She knows who Dorian is, right? She knows that his nickname is Prince Charming. And the words there, "made me what I am," in other words, Dorian has had a negative impact on her life, has corrupted her as well. Look where she's landed up. And James can't believe it. He stands up and says, "You lie." And she says, "No, before God, I'm telling the truth. Strike me dumb if it ain't so. He is the worst one that comes here. They say he has sold himself to the devil for a pretty face." And with that ending of the chapter, really heightens the tension, because now as the reader we know that James Vane knows who Dorian is, knows what he looks like. And so now he's certainly going to, if after 18 years he's still looking for the killer of Sybil Vane, or the person who made her kill herself, if he's still got that hunger, and now he suddenly knows who the guy is, and he let him go accidentally, he's certainly not going to stop now. He's certainly going to go and look for Dorian. It says he broke from her with an oath and rushed to the corner of the street, but Dorian Gray had disappeared. When he looked back, the woman had vanished also.